daily stand-up is repetitive all the time, right? What are different ways to make it more engaging, make it more interactive, so that way your developers are really taking advantage of what it is for, right? And also, how do we make it not to be a status kind of sessions that we do have, because oftentimes I notice when you go into organization, it becomes more of a status or update meeting, right? So how do we facilitate a daily stand-up effectively? And now I'm going to hand the mic to Humphrey. And Humphrey, you can go ahead.
All right, how you guys doing? I'm going to give a presentation here on how to facilitate an effective daily Scrum. I was hoping it meant daily stand-up, right? When I saw the title, I'm like, I'm pretty sure when they say daily Scrum, I could always interpret it different ways, but I went with my gut, and we're going to talk about the daily stand-up, which to me is actually my favorite ceremony. A lot of people, a lot of Scrum Masters you hear, they will default to the retrospective because it's fun, it's engaging, and yada, yada, yada. But I found in practice that actually the more interesting engagements are found in the daily stand-up. And it's just the way you go about it. And of course, what we want to talk about here is, we're going to go over to the fundamentals, right? About what the daily stand-up is. A lot of stuff that you already should know, especially if you're learning. This things will be common to you. And also, then I'm just going to offer little nuggets here as far as what you hope to get out of it. And then I'm going to conclude it with just a small tidbit on the definition of done, because that is one of the things you want to kind of clarify, and you could do that at a daily stand-up, right? If a story or enabler is going to get done, that's that could be actually that's one of the status updates that you will find in the daily Scrum. So let me get my pointer here. So what is the daily stand-up? Right here, I just put a picture of what we understand, the whole Agile thing, right? Yeah, you have your product backlog, their iteration planning, and then, we have these different features that are being done within a sprint, and then there's an iteration review. So just to kind of jog your memory as far as what Scrum is and what the Agile process is, this is it. And this is why with these things going on, right? Having an idea of what you expect out of an Agile process, such as, or a ceremony, such as the daily stand-up, is important. Also, the Agile Manifesto, right? The Agile Manifesto, basically Agile has 4 values and about like 12 objectives. But if you're really if you really understood what the Agile Manifesto is, it has these four values, right? These 4 values that you can actually derive from a daily stand-up, right? Individuals over and interactions over processes and tools. Basically, when we talk about the daily stand-up, there's different tools to facilitate that, whether it be the Teams app or whatever, or Zoom, whatever you guys do your stand-up, or even like tools like ServiceNow or Jira. These tools, the way you interact with it, they're great, but they don't replace the true interaction, the value of that interaction that happens between team members. That's definitely important. Working product over comprehensive documentation. Now, things have to work, right? Some stories, a lot of stories actually should come with documentation that's uploaded, like most software that you guys probably are familiar with have a README file, right? So that documentation is important. However, does the product work is what is more important. That should take precedent over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. That's kind of broad, but basically a company or someone that's actually getting value or feedback from customer is better than trying to negotiate over what you're going to get for the product, right? It's about that interaction that you get from your stakeholders, right? Those that are giving you the feedback, that are actually looking to the product, that's giving you feedback about your product. Those things are more important than the less real things, such as, you know, the money or what they owe you or what have you. And responding to change over following a plan, right? In the daily stand-up, right? There might be an update, right? There might be an update that actually has you change course, right? And basically, we can find that out of the daily stand-up, and you know, you always have an opportunity to follow up after the daily stand-up. But for an effective Scrum Master or even an effective team as a whole to actually hear this and quickly to respond to it, it kind of the magic kind of happens first at the daily stand-up. How effective your daily stand-up is how effective your team can hear an update and then kind of go into a mode that will actually respond to that, rather than being really frigid. As far as, you know, we have to do this stand-up for so long, and you know, giving just, you know, process, or not even responding to the change, not even looking at it because there's a plan, we already have our objective set or our story point set, and just following what that looks like. So again, this is why my favorite ceremony is the daily stand-up, because these are the things that you can actually implement in the daily stand-up. So now let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Even after what I just said, can somebody else give me their idea of what the daily stand-up is? Perhaps I missed something, or you heard different, and you could be in conflict with what I just said. If anybody can, be brave. Go ahead and give me your idea of the daily stand-up.
Humphrey, is it okay to go back to the previous slide, please? Okay. I think we should kind of have a conversation with each of those processes, right? When it comes to having a daily stand-up, have a visual understanding of what does that look like when we talk about individuals and interaction over processes and tools, right? Let's have a conversation, especially with Scrum Masters, working Scrum Masters on here, and be able to understand what does that look like? How do we facilitate a daily stand-up where we're effectively having those individuals' interactions and not necessarily focus too much on the tools. And when I say tools, meaning Jira or whatever it is that we're using, right, to track our project. So Scrum Masters on here, let's have a conversation. What are ways that you do to promote individuals and interaction during your stand-up? Who wants to go ahead and elaborate a little bit? How does that look like?
As far as individuals and interactions over processes and tools, I think what this is saying is more, you know, rather than just sticking to a script and sounding like a robot, you want to actually, you know, talk to your team. Okay. So rather than saying, okay, everyone go around, what did you do yesterday? What do you do? That's typical. And if you're up to date on the Scrum guide, they try to push you away from that. Right. So getting more people involved, right? Speaking to your team, asking, hey guys, so, you know, just making it more fun, you know, like Humphrey was saying, how do you really interact with the team and getting everyone comfortable? So it's like, hey, Jim, you know, how's your dog? People love talking about their dogs and their pets, right? Or just being, you know, trying to get to know the individuals that you're working with. As a Scrum Master, it's your job to like take notes of those little things, right? to kind of throw it back into the conversation, make people feel involved. If you know there's a developer that does not like talking, does not, like putting on his camera, just find creative ways of bringing a team together. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of like my idea when I see this.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like asking little personal questions or having some kind of conversation with them based on maybe something that they've said in the past, or even maybe something that they said during retrospective or retrospective activity that you guys did, and bring that back to let them know that, hey, I care about you. I remember what you said, and we're building that relationship, right? We're building that bond and that trust within ourselves. And we don't have to wait to retrospective to do that. We can do that through our daily interaction, right? By building those relationship within each other. So thank you. That was an awesome point. Any other Scrum Master want to give their own perspective on that?
Hi, this is Oli. Great point. Everyone has said, sorry, there's echo. Let me shut my door real quick. Sorry, I'm sorry. For me, what I have used in the past that is working, or I felt I've worked, as far as also part of that interaction is that like at the end of every stand-up, we typically have something called daily trivia. And it's always just this, so then I managed 2 teams, and I managed a back-end team and a front-end team. And it was more of a Scrum Man team, going over the goals for the day, focus for the day. And my Jira board was created in such a way that I did not do all that. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing tomorrow? Whatever that. So I walked from right to left with my board. So what was accomplished, I just go from right to left and I just focus on it. And just focusing on the task at hand and ensuring that I'm holding them accountable, making sure that someone is responsible for each task. So, hey, I saw that we have so many stories in done. Good job, team. Hey, we're able to push the stories to done. Who is on point to, and we have this much stories in accepted. Is the product owner going to accept the story today? Hey, I'll address that person by the name once you move that story. Who's on point for team review? Hey, do you have capacity to test? And then I walk back from my right to left, and you're focusing on each task and holding them accountable and say, hey, do you have capacity for this? Is anything going to block you? Is anything going to impede you? Once I finish that, I go to any packing lot. Once we finish packing lot, then we do the daily trivia, and they look forward to that daily trivia. It's just a fun type interactive thing where it could be multiple choice questions, like there are 5 colors in Skittles, candy Skittles, and one is different. Tell me what it is. And the first to get that trivia sends the answer to me or anybody, whoever's in charge of the daily trivia. Once you get that answer, the first to get the answer is the next person that is going to ask daily trivia for the next day. And sometimes there's like a little 2-3 minutes chitty chatty around that. Oh my God, you talk about, oh, that's really fun. I didn't know there was sweet lemon, if it's sweet lemon that the answer was. I didn't know there was sweet lemon cherry. I was like, yeah, I was surprised too. I never tasted, just little thing to just keep them going and keep them, just pepped up for the day, because not everybody comes, I'm not a morning person, and not everybody comes in that morning wanting to go over reports or what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? What are you doing again? Yeah. So that's what I've typically done for my team. So.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, that's actually very clever, right? But I was just, I couldn't help but think, how do you time box that? Because that can go, as you know, it can go like 20, 30 minutes. Like just the trivia itself, I can see that running 10 minutes by itself. So how do you time box that? So
I have 2 teams. I have maybe 10 in total, 5 and 5. It's not a whole lot. I don't have big teams. So max, once we go over that update, I want to say maybe max we spend, and we go fast. There's some days we go over. Don't get me wrong. There's some days we go over 30 minutes that we're not even able to do the daily trivia. But for the most part, I want to say if we miss daily trivia, maybe max once or twice a week. We make daily trivia, maybe max, maybe even once a week. So once you've gone over that, because if you have a smaller team, it's easier. Now the team I work with, oh my God, now that's a different challenge to get them to talk, because I want to say like the culture or the environment or the type of people you work with also has a factor in it. But this here, they grew up together, fresh people from out of college, being with the company for 3-4 years. So they kind of, they like those kind of things, So even when I'm doing retro, to digress, I have to literally go rack my brain on a team building activity for my team because they like those type of things when I worked with that company. So that's how I've done it. And, it's to where we never go overtime when we do the intro. And even in max, like both of my stand-ups are like 15 minutes each. So that's how I've done that.
Nice. So we've also learned another technique that you mentioned, right? You're working the board and holding them accountable is also another way that a Scrum Master can really feel valuable and can also show that they're adding value to the team, right? And not just facilitating or by asking those 3 questions and letting everyone take turns, right? But if we're going into the board and really having them talk about their availability, their capacity, what have they done, who's able to take on something, right? Who has done what, and give them kudos for those things, right? And following up with them. So that's also another tactic when it comes to facilitating daily stand-up effectively. Do we have one more person to go and then we'll move on to the next one?
Question?
Sure, go ahead.
Was this strictly for working Scrum Masters or?
Are you saying, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Was that?
No, Victoria, thank you.
All right, no problem. All right, the next point says working products over comprehensive documentation. How do we do that in daily stand-up? Who wants to take a shot? Working products over comprehensive documentation.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, for working product, for my team, what I had to do is probably 2 times, probably 2 days out of the week, I try to let the team demo completed stories. And so, for example, most of the times we have a general showcase for the whole train. So sometimes my team, we don't have opportunity to demo most of the items that we have. So what I just probably had to implement in my team is for us to 2 days out of each week, we can demo any completed story after the stand-up, just for extra items to discuss about those stories that were completed and get feedback from other team members on that call. So that's how I've tried to implement that for my team, just to show a working software for during our stand-up meeting.
Awesome. Thanks. So do a little demo of the functionality that has been done. And also it sounds like that's also a good way to inspect what has been done and see if we're missing anything, right? Because there are some teams that I've worked with in the past where when we wait till the end to do demonstration of everything that we have deployed, that we have produced, oftentimes we find out that there are some stories that there were some exceptions, right? Or we missed a test scenario or some type of scenario that we did not capture or that was missed, and then it could not be defined as done. So oftentimes that becomes a problem. So it sounds like doing a demo, if there's time, right? A quick demo of what has been completed. So that way, if there's any adjustments, right, it's part of the inspecting and seeing if there's any adjustment that needs to be done, we can be able to quickly do those before the sprint ends. So sounds like a good perspective. Thank you for that. Any other perspective on that? Working product over comprehensive documentation.
I want to just echo that that's something that's actually done also or where I work. And that was a suggestion even from the team, because they said, oh, you know what, we don't have to wait until the sprint review to do this, right? If the story is completed within time, and it probably will take 2 or 3 minutes to demo that, especially if it has a UI perspective. Go ahead, let's see what this is, and you can do a quick demo in a daily stand-up.
Yep. Um, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, specifically with the whole comprehensive documentation, right? If Grace is here, she'll probably be able to speak on this as well. I know I've been in a couple organizations where literally in daily stand-up, they're documenting the statuses of every developers and what they're saying. And I've seen that in couple organizations. How have you guys ever witnessed that? And what do you feel about that? Having to document or take status, right, of your daily stand-up. How do we feel about that? Do we feel like that's an anti-pattern, or that's something that is helpful, useful? Or do we feel like we shouldn't do that? And if so, how would you encourage against that?
For one, I'm 50-50 on it. Yes, yeah, work in product takes over comprehensive documentation for sure. However, sometimes, like I said, I encourage, and yeah, I do encourage my developers to sometimes they made a change, right? So let's say they had to make a change or loop around to make something work. I rather have them. I try to encourage they document that change, because yes, well, we can get it done, we can complete it. I would like to see there might be that little note say, hey, this was what the goal was. When we first started this, we thought it would work this way, but we found that a better way was done, and then we implemented this change, and it's working like this, right? That little note for me is it's a documentation, right? You're giving an update, clarity, or what have you, but it has nothing to do with the working product, right? And so it's always a hit or miss. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't, right? They'll just make sure that it's done, it works, it's reviewed, it checks, it can be deployed. That's pretty much, at the end of the day, as long as it can get into production and it works, it doesn't matter what was written or what changed or whatever happened. So in practice, I like to read it, but it has nothing to do with the actual product or it working in like production.
So that sounds reasonable, especially like if there's a change in some kind of coding or whatever they've done, right? It's important to document, especially in that specific story, document what were those changes, right? Especially if something has to go into production, or if we have to revert certain things, or maybe that even that, especially for me to prior as a Scrum Master, I would ask them, especially if I know there is a developer that will be leaving, right, the organization, I will tell them to go ahead and add some kind of documentation of the process that you've been using, or best coding practices that you've been using. So whomever joins in and pick up that work that you're working on, they can be able to go in there, read all of the information that you have on there, and be able to pick up on it, rather than having to start from scratch, right? So documentation can definitely be useful in those instances. Even another thing too, when we're doing our capacity planning, right, and we know that maybe a developer through mid of the sprint, they're going to be going out on PTO, and that story is going to be hanging in the sprint, right? Oftentimes I'll tell them, hey, go ahead and document where you have left off from, right? What have you done so far? So then when someone else has the capacity to be able to pick it up, they can go on there, read what you have done so far, and be able to pick up from where you left, and then continue with that story, right? So documentation can definitely be impactful in such manner. Are there any other ways that you guys have seen documentation done in your organization that has been helpful?
Yeah, Victor.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Just a quick one before.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. So for documentation, something we need to just take note of is a lot of times. So I been a Scrum Master in the medical industry, right? So we have a lot of compliance thing we need to follow, right? So like we have SRS document, which is the software requirement document, right? We need to update those documents every single time we make changes. Since we're developing medical equipment. So stuff like that has to be actually prioritized during our planning, just because I create story for that specifically for the team to update those documents. Because as soon as you finish that phase and you forget to update those documents, you might end up realizing that you don't have updated documentation whenever auditing comes straight to your organization. So situations like that is very important. And just to let others know that if you're in the medical industry or a very restricted industry, that will be very for you to take note of for your team to update those documents as well. Yeah.
And it sounds like you pointed out a really specific skill that you're using, right? Which I think we should take note of too, right? Not just saying, oh, documentation is important, but the way you're going about doing the documentation. You mentioned that you actually create a story for that, right? So we'll create a story just to provide that transparency, just show that, hey, this documentation needs to be done. And this is also a way to allow the team to see that transparency aspect of it, right? And I'm not sure, do you guys point those stories or you just leave it open?
So I leave it. So the story, we have to close it out by the end of the sprint. So each sprint I have that story created, right? Just as a reminder and transparency that no one should actually complete this. So it's part of our definition of done. Specifically, but I put that as a track on the sprint board just to make sure we have that in mind, so we can remind every other team members that we need to update this document, and it's part of our definition of done. So, but for my team, it's just something I call condition of satisfaction. So I created condition of satisfaction as a Scrum Master for my team, just to make sure, okay, after we meet this conditions, that means we're satisfied with the sprints. So that is part of the thing we pay attention to as a team. Yeah.
Excellent.
I have a
Thank you for
follow-up
that.
question to that really quickly.
Go ahead.
So that condition of satisfaction, where do you document that? Is that a document that is stored in Confluence, or where do you actually document it?
So we have so the same page. So I have a team page for my team on Confluence. So we have conditional satisfaction, we have definition of done, definition of ready. So conditional satisfaction is way different from definition of done and definition of any other documents that we have on there. So conditional satisfaction is strictly for most of the critical items that we know has to be put in place before we close our sprint specifically.
Awesome. And I'm assuming too, is that something maybe you can even put within your working agreement as well? Put all of that, including your definition of done and ready, and all of that into this big old document. All right, any other take on this?
I do have a little bit to add.
Okay, go ahead.
So in a case where we want working product over documentation, we might take an example of a new project that comes in, team is not sure what to do, they do a proof of concept. And when you do that, you just want to make sure that, this is feasible, but right after that, you have documentation now takes priority, because you want to make sure that security is built in, especially when you're in companies like Walmart too. You have to send all of this information to the security team, especially if it has PCI information. It is something that is going to deal with images, viewing people. You want to make sure that, there is privacy involved and all of that security built in. So documentation will obviously, take priority over working software at that point.
Okay. Thank you. Sean, do you have something to add or?
Not at all.
Okay. All righty. Any other?
Just to add a little bit about documentation too. It could also help in onboarding new team members. So, for example, if you go through a development phase, a development story, and you know the steps, maybe it's a new kind of development that they're doing. It's also, in my teams, we also advise them to do documentation so that if a new team member comes, or in the future, if another team member is working on that same kind of story, they just go through it and take a look at it and the steps to follow.
Awesome, good point. Olawumi, do you have something to say?
And it would help with succession planning as well. Because you find out that people tripping in and out, left and right. By the time they're tripping in and out, there's nothing that is documented for people to literally work on, so great. We've all excellent points, excellent point. I typically, we do documentation and comprehensive documentation when there's, after every story, there's a blockage or a dependency from another team, and it could be a testing code, or it could be anything, ways of deploying. So everything has to be literally documented on Confluence page so that others never have the same issue, or whenever that issue occurs, other people know how to resolve the problem. So, documentation I find is very, very important. Now, if it's every step, every minute, now that can be very bumped down, because guess what? I feel that would end up falling on the Scrum Master. And then you not only became a Scrum Master, then you become that Jira scribe or an admin person. So, at that point in time, it needs to be defined, and it needs to be differentiated, and you need to make sure what truly needs to be documented or not. So that's my take on that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now let's move on to the customer collaboration over contract negotiation. How does that play a role in daily stand-ups? Who wants to take that?
I'll go. So for my team, the teams I currently work with, my first team is really self-contained, managed, well-established. How they do more customer collaboration is, we are internal, even peer-to-peer, we're internal customers, and it could be a different team. So within stand-ups, or there could be an issue they're going through or something, there's a blockage or a dependency, they get on a call right away and sync in. Or they'll, most of the time they sync in, or they do a peer-to-peer, and or they'll connect with the other department that they're having those issues with and talk things through and see, hey, how can we figure this out? How can we do this testing? And that has truly helped. Sometimes I sit in on the call, sometimes the testing codes, they say, okay, let's figure this out. Let's see why this is not working. It looks gibberish to me, but just sitting there and having them toggle through it and fixing it right away really helps. So that's where I see customer collaboration coming in, and not necessarily your external, but your internal counterparts that you're working with. That's my take.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Any other perspective? All right, what about responding to change over following a plan? I know Scrum Masters, we should have a lot to say on this one. So who wants to take this?
Can I go? Because I just went through one.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize. Go ahead.
Yes, you will get those. And for aspiring Scrum Masters, I like my current role, or my current position, or my current company that I work for. I did not go into that. I went into the company, I know what to do, but I went in trying to really balance knowing my people, because it was a complete different culture. So having to do that, didn't have a product owner, having to serve in the capacity of a Scrum Master, product owner, program manager, and what it was cumbersome. So having to learn all that, learn the people, understand the people, know the department and know the business, and then trying to facilitate all of my ceremonies was very challenging. So having to do that, we were dropping balls, creating stories, chasing them up and down, moving stories. I literally became a Jira scribe, and at a point it became bumped down, and I I had some offshore people on my team. So you can imagine that would be very challenging. I had to do some refinements at night. I had to do some sprint planning at night. I would start my day in the morning and I don't end at night sometimes. That took a toll on me mentally. So I had to come up with a new working agreement, considering they've been used to working in certain ways and they're used to the way they're working, then it was had to push them to work. It was had to get them to move in, put them in that agile mind frame. So a working agreement was what I created. I did a workflow plan. I defined every role, every Scrum ceremony that we do, who needs to attend, what the intent is, what the responsibility was, what we were doing that is not working, and ways of working and how we need to improve. And I tell you, it was very, very hard for them to adjust to. They're still adjusting. Sprint ends today. Oh, sprint ended yesterday. Sprint starts today. I'm probably still multitasking, looking through their work right now as we speak. But the working agreement was something that everyone, I feel, every team needs to have from get-go so that you have that understanding of what's going on. It's the working norm that would make it easy on everybody. It's the plan that would make it easy on everybody to ensure that you're achieving your goal. That way, work is it's not falling out. You're not being stressed. It doesn't get cumbersome on one person. You're not taking the ball for everything. So having to create that working agreement with my team helped me. There was a few pushbacks here and there, but it had to be mandated. And when it wasn't mandated, I had to, put my authority in it, letting them know that this is the ways of working and this is what I'm expecting so things can get better. It makes no sense when we're planning all this work and at the end of the day, we can't finish it, or we're pushing it to next sprint, or we're carrying it over. So it was quite challenging, and I struggled, went through pains, and then after creating the working agreement, I'm encouraging them, pushing them, not necessarily, there's a way where Scrum Masters should, you have to coach. You have to learn. I had to get away from the doing and learning to teach and coach them. So, and letting them know that it's an agreement. It's a way of productivity. It's a way of working. It's a way of improving. It's a way of helping to shape interaction, to shape the team better, like team norms, So that is a big thing for me. So going into a team, make sure you have a working agreement. It's very important.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like having those working agreement really helps when it comes to mitigating a lot of changes when it comes to a sprint, and also holding them accountable for that they committed to within that sprint. Lady Ann, I see your hand up.
So one thing that I really like about the 2020 Scrum Guide is that it took off the 3 questions. Because that is like a plan, right? You get into the daily Scrum, you have to ask your developers, what did you do yesterday? That's pushing you towards the goal, blah, blah, blah. I'm really glad that that was no longer a recommendation, because when you do that all the time, it becomes boring, right? You want to develop more ways to make your daily stand-ups fun, because first of all, it's too many meetings, daily stand-up inclusive. So some members, if you don't make them fun, it's just going to be like, okay, I have a conflict, I can't attend daily stand-up today. These are my updates and stuff like that, and then they don't show up. So I always try to develop different ways of running the daily stand-up. I don't follow that plan of going, asking, what did you do yesterday and stuff like that. Sometimes I even use my daily stand-ups for refinement, right? Just as the need comes. So if we have to use it for refinement, maybe we use the group chat to update our stories and then point out any impediments that we have. And then we have to talk about a little bit and then go into refining a story. So the point about following that 3-question plan being removed from the 2020 guide has really, really, really helped my team, because people go now expecting, not knowing what is going to really happen during that stand-up. And it's kind of really exciting every time they come, knowing that something different is, you're going to run the daily stand-up in a different way every time.
Good point.
And
Thank you for that. Max.
Yeah, so another thing is, it's good you said that, but what I can always say about situations like this is, let's always understand that Scrum Guide is a guide, right? It's just like you having a manual for something. Let me say cooking if something jollof rice. Even if you put the salt first or you put it last, right? It all depends on how you want it to actually taste at the end of the day. So, for example, I just use, okay, what's the game plan for today, right? Even without them changing the Scrum Guide or even looking at the Scrum Guide or the whichever thing it is, it all depends on the environment that you find yourself. What like how is the whole ecosystem of your organization or the team you're actually leading, right? It really help a lot because sometimes for those that are aspiring to become Scrum Masters, during interviews, if you start saying, oh, what went well, what didn't go well, do you have blockers? They will know you're just following, will I say, what the guy talked about, right? I've been in an interview whereby they were asking about, okay, how do you facilitate your daily Scrum? If you use such approach, they will know, okay, you just went to go do training somewhere. Just like what our sister just said here, it's something is a good takeaway, right? Let's actually take that in because it will help a lot for you to actually spice up your daily stand-up. Like she said, sometimes me too, I use my daily stand-up for what? Backlog refinement. We can just visit something and just discuss about it and quickly, or for demo, quick demo, and we discuss about it because at the end of the day, it's all about you inculcating new ideas and putting it in and never make it boring. So it's a good one as well to add to that. And I think the last question was on responding to change, right? Victoria. So I've been in situations whereby, so one of our clients is it's just dealership, right? A lot of time they just want to change something on the user experience side of stuff. They want it to look a certain way every single time. This actually made my team to start attending customers meeting every Tuesday. So we can actually not come tomorrow and they will tell us one new thing that we don't know about. So responding to change is something that it depends on, again, on the environment, right? It's something that is inevitable. So as a Scrum Master, I've actually learned a lot in that regard to get my team involved in those customer meetings so we can actually don't be in a situation whereby we're caught unawares. And before you know, that will affect the team's work for that specific sprint. So what I did for my team was to make sure we get involved in those calls every Tuesday. So whenever changes happen, we're aware right on time and we don't lose track of what we are currently focused on for each sprint. So that's just my take on that responding to change aspect of your question.
Thank you for that. Sayo, is your hand up?
Yeah, so I have a question concerning the responding to change. Like during sprints, when you have a change request from stakeholders, do we have practical examples of how you handle such changes or change in requirements or change in scope? Do you go ahead with developing what you guys already planned and probably add the scope to another sprint? Or what's, I need a practical example from working Scrum Masters.
So
What's the
good
ideal
question,
way?
right? Good question in the sense that you're asking, yes, change is inevitable. That is something that you're going to come across in any team, right? No matter the type of environment you're working with, is even more prevalent if the company is or the product that you guys are working are very complex and very high demanding, or the team has multiple priorities within a sprint, right? So oftentimes you're going to come across that. So the question for that, and especially we have working Scrum Masters here, so maybe we can give different perspective and ways you have used in being able to really mitigate those changes. So what are some of the techniques that you have used as a Scrum Master to be able to mitigate those changes or to be able to at least balance those changes and also follow up to make sure that certain things are balanced, right? So what are some techniques that you guys have used?
Well, I have a few, right? So I'm going to try and quickly go over them, right? I did have one team that had finished one product. It had finished one product. It was and that product is now in UATs, and the project thrusted upon them something else to work on, right? So we're working on a different product. However, we're also effectively handling any UAT defects, right? And sometimes it's UAT defects. It could be a training issue, like they will call it a defect and it's a training, or it was the product didn't work like it was intended, right? The requirements didn't really satisfy what was needed from the product. So we had to quickly deliberate and get that within the sprint and get that done. And sometimes these updates didn't require, it took priority over the other product that was thrust upon us. So that happened. And one way to mitigate against that was that I knew this was happening. This was going to happen. We were going to have this dual role. So in my PI planning, I gave it a sufficient coverage, right? I itemized it as UAT so that I had the capacity to do that. So that's one thing, one way that you can respond to change. Another thing, right, is another reason where you will respond to changes. What if, right? So what if you have planned effectively your sprint, and all of a sudden there was an unknown dependency, right? An unknown dependency based on the work that had to be done by another team. Let's say another team had you had that dependency that there should be a completion, right? Like especially if you had two intermingling products that if one doesn't work, the other cannot. And the expectation is that the team would have finished that product so that the one that you were working on could be implemented. It couldn't. So they're behind, your story falls back and it's needed. So it would now have to roll to the next sprint. So that is a change. That change now impacts the next sprint. You have to accommodate for that. And that's the way you will accommodate for that, of course, either you have to reprioritize, what was in the sprint that you had planned before, or, and like me, I never plan a sprint at 100% capacity. I don't think that's what. Sometimes I go by, I adjust always for 75 sprint capacity for all sprints, just so that if I did have to bump it, I always have that cushion. And that's what I would recommend, that you always leave yourself a little cushion, because even if that doesn't happen, you can bring in something out off the backlog, and so that you continue to now work on some uncommitted objectives. So that's one way to go about it. And I did have a third, and the third is something that you guys should be familiar with, right? All of a sudden there's a pressing need, and this is simply theoretical. For that to kind of happen, and again, it will have to be like in a UAT, like this change is needed because the product that you're working on, it has a release that's pending into production, and so that could be recognized, in that scenario. So so that one and third is pretty much the same. I hope that helps.
So it sounds like one of the technique you mentioned is having a buffer, right, when it comes to our capacity and velocity planning. And I know couple rules are like the 80-20% rule, meaning to only commit to 80% of your team's velocity and then leave 20% as a buffer, whether it's a new priority coming into the sprints or whether it's bugs that you're tackling during the sprints, right? But to be able to leave that 20% for that, or for even any innovation that needs to happen. I know in safe environment, they really encourage having either 80-20, 30%, right? So that's a couple things that you can do as a Scrum Master. Any other techniques? And also, let's also talk about what if the priority is happening in that sprint. Sprint has started, we're rolling. And your product owner comes in and say, hey, we have a new priorities, put that in the backlog, begin working on it because this is what business wants. How would you tackle it as a Scrum Master for the team? Max, I see you unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I wanted to just say something. So I was thinking you were saying the stories are all on priority in the sprint. I just wanted to say not all stories have probably have priority in the sprint. So in that case, I think having story swap would be a good option, right? So swapping an existing story in that current sprint with the priority item. But there's a lot of caveats in this situation because then the team has to decide if they have a developer or the expertise to look into that item. For example, if it's a story that has to do with someone who has React skills or someone who has a UI UX design skills just to do some kind of design on that item, that will have to be discussed by the team to see if they have availability. Because I've been in a situation whereby some priorities are being identified, but the team said they don't have someone that has that skill set, and you will be surprised the stakeholders can hold on that. So it's not every story that they come and say is a priority that has to be worked on that sprint. So in that situation, what we had to do was to let them know, okay, we don't have anyone who has that skill set to work on that item. And that was left out for the next sprint. So in situations like that, all I can actually say in this situation is to see if the team has that bandwidth to work on that item or if the team has the skill set. But if they have those skill sets and the bandwidth, then there's no harm in trying to take in that priority item and deprioritize any item that is existing in that current sprint. So yeah, that would be very, very key to the team's decision on if they're able to work on that item, that sprint. So as a Scrum Master, you just have to let them know the advantages of them working on that item and see if they can work on that item. So that would be what I can contribute to that.
Awesome. Follow-up question. So good part with that, right? And that's also another technique to use, whereas you discussed, does the team have the bandwidth and also do they have the skill set? Because that's very important. If they don't have the skill set, but they have the bandwidth, then how are they going to be able to actually build that functionality that you're asking for? When you mentioned about reprioritizing the other stories in the sprints, how does that look like? Can you visualize that for us?
Yeah, so what actually happens every sprint is not all items in a sprint is priority. Okay, so yeah, so what we do is, for example, we have other team members working on some items that are not actually priority. A team member that actually have the skill set of that new item can actually reassign their own story or their task to the other person working on that deprioritized item that is not actually of high priority, then pick up the new item that has high priority because they have that skill set, right? So now we're deprioritizing the initial item that was prioritized before because the intention was to actually complete that item, but we actually have to move it over to the person that's actually can work on that item without putting more pressure on them because they're taking something that someone started working on initially, but they're trying to meet up and cover up on that person, not in the situation whereby they are committed to that item, but trying to help out. That's how we deprioritize it. So we don't put pressure on that developer taking the other developer's story, but we just deprioritize it in the sense that, okay, psychologically, just realize that, okay, this item that you're working on, we're not trying to put pressure on you. Just take up this item just to cover out for Mr. A or B,
then Mr. A or B can actually focus on the new item because he has the skill set and he feels he can cover up and finish up this item in a timely manner as required for the PO or the business.
Thank you for that. I always like to see us actually bring that to life, visualize it, so that way as we're using words or saying certain things, we can also picture how that would look like. So thank you, Max, for that. Any other perspective? All righty, Humphrey, back to you.
Actually, now I don't know what else to say. That was pretty much it. Scrum Masters here. So yeah, it's a 15-30-minute meeting that takes place. And of course, that has a lot to do with the size of your team, right? And sometimes you need 30 minutes, but oftentimes for my small experience, I've seen only it being really a 15 minutes that ends up being longer because of, sometimes updates take a little bit longer. It tracks the progress of team stories and the status of tasks related to the story. But most importantly, and I think it gives the team an opportunity to really interact in real terms. That means they see you. And as you see, Victoria also, kind of insists that people put their camera on because in Scrum, face-to-face interaction is supreme. I think that's actually in the Agile Manifesto, or at least in the principles, right? Where that face-to-face is important, and you could get that opportunity as a team, really, in the daily stand-up. So let me go ahead quickly. And these are the 3 questions, right? So I know that if you're just learning this thing, you should be familiar, right? These are the 3 questions, and this is like your basic questions that one will ask at the stand-up. However, as you've heard, right, when we really had working Scrum Masters kind of go over what they are doing on their stand-ups and what they're bringing about it, they normally have this in the back of their mind, right? So they're able to go about these questions, right? But they do it in different ways, right? So that they can kind of get it out of their team members, right? So you want to identify 3 things. What the work was, impediments, right? That's important. You want your team, basically, as you work on your team to be a little bit more open and mature. You want them to, come up with blocks and impediments. And I wanted to go further into this in the next slide. So that's also, that's brought up in the DSU. And also sometimes these conversations can take a while, right? These conversations can take a while. This is a good opportunity to kind of talk about that. I mean, by the book, if things take too long, there's a meet after, right? You can spin it up, we can meet after the meeting. Other times, the way I like to do it, sometimes I'm able to go, like if everything is just going the way it's planned, there's no blocks, there's no impediments, this progress in the story is great. I can go over the updates pretty fast, and then hey, without the meet after, you guys, we could talk about it right there in the daily stand-up. But it just depends on the dynamic, of course. So that's one thing you guys could also think about. Does anyone have any other thing they try to get out of a daily stand-up other than what I described here?
So I have a question, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but
sure, go ahead.
Look at these 3 key things, right? I know as Scrum Masters, we have to think of like creative ways to, I guess, indirectly ask these questions. So I wanted to see if we have the time, just a couple of examples of what we do instead of these 3 typical questions that teams are used to hearing.
Oh, good question. And again, I have my way, and because I have worked with my team to whenever I ask something, these are what I'm asked. This is what I'm asking about, right? So that their response is always in these terms. So if I ask, John, so tell me about this story, or tell me about this task. John will tell me what they did yesterday, what they did today, what they're going to do the next day. This is what they're working on. There's no impediments, nothing is stalling me. And that's that, right? And so it sometimes that takes, coaching, that when you coach your team, they actually blurt these things out. Sometimes you have to pry it open, especially if you're keen. And one of the things I wish I thought about it later when I was putting up the slide is you always prep before your daily stand-up. You prep, you kind of look at what, you have some expectation of what these stories are. And if there's something different, right? Something that you didn't see coming, it prompts you to ask why or what those questions are. Especially if, like, a task was supposed to be completed yesterday, you catch it on your radar. So how come this didn't happen? And hopefully you get it there. Hopefully you get the answer there. Oftentimes, sometimes, let me not say often, you might not, and then you have to ping the person later to further go over what's going on. That's what I do anyways. Any other suggestion?
I was gonna say, just like you said, oh, sorry. I was gonna say, just also, depending on the maturity of your team and the team dynamics, sometimes I like to just keep it fun, like, for instance, you said, John, I'm like, John, talk to me, baby, what do you have? And then from there.
So you call your clients, your team members, baby, right? I just want to take it. So you want me to call? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
It depends on, like, the dynamic of the team, sometimes, they already know what the daily stand-up is. They already know why we're in this meeting. The expectations are already clear, right? So if it's a brand new team, yes, okay, we can say, okay, tell me what you did yesterday. Tell me what you did today. But if it's a team, we do this every day. Everybody already knows what it is. Honestly, you don't even have to ask the question anymore, right?
While you were speaking, I was just thinking of something as well, like having, say, how you do this whole, like, pass the ball thing, so it doesn't have to constantly be you, right? We talk about having a team being self-managed, like you want them talking and interacting. So I think, and this is not something I practice, just thinking about it, just hearing you talk, I'm like, it would be fun to kind of say, you know what, hey, pass the ball to John, right? So we have the team members do that, right? I think that would be a fun way to kind of get the team interacting.
That's a good one. Another thing is, depending on how comfortable your team is, you could have the team members facilitate the daily, right? So maybe one day we have person one that will run it. One day we have person two. But I brought this up sometime and someone mentioned that sometimes the team is not comfortable and they feel like, oh, you're the Scrum Master, you're just trying to, like, give us your job. So again, it just depends on your team dynamic. Chichi, you have your hands up.
Yes, but it was pertaining to, like, 2 slides ago. I wanted interactions over the processes and tools.
My team, I just tell them, okay, guys, what's the game plan? So, like, when I call the person's name, immediately, like Grace said, it depends on the dynamic of your team, right? So if they already know the reason why they are in that meeting, so as soon as they finish talking, you say, okay, what's your game plan for today? So that's just a different way of you saying it. And another thing I try to do is I don't follow the normal routine of, like, if I have like a list at which I call them, like, from the first person to the last person, sometimes I swap it, right? I go probably from the sender or from the person on the top.
So like it actually make them avoid being distracted, because sometimes some people will tell you, oh, he's going to call me last. They might be busy doing something in their bedroom. And when you start calling them, oh, John, they'll say, oh, John is not there. That's John is probably busy doing something else. So that's another way at which I try to spice up my DSU, just to make sure everybody's focused and in that specific call on that day. So that's just how I do my.
I like
just
that.
want to share.
I like that. So just kind of, keep them on their toes. They're not, because I feel like if you keep it, if you're just predictable, it's easy for them to say, well, what's the point of me even being in this meeting? I can slack you everything I'm going to do. Why am I here? Right? So good work, Maxie.
Busala?
What if there's a situation where there's a flag on a particular story for a while? Is it okay to bring it up during the daily scrum? Like a particular team member flagged the user story and it has been flagged for some couple of days. Is it okay to bring it up during the scrum?
I would.
It should have been flagged. Let's say the flag comes up on Monday, right? By Tuesday morning, it should have been addressed in the daily stand-up. Normally would even want it to be addressed before the daily, maybe in the Slack channel, maybe someone can just mention it. But if not, the next day in daily stand-up, it needs to be addressed with the team. It could be during parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything to add?
Also, like basically, that could be a loaded question, right? What if this flag takes time in your daily stand-up? Maybe it's not that simple, and it still needs to be discussed. Again, it just depends on the dynamic of your team, right? You're probably could fit it in, or you do a meet after. And so basically, and that's the power of this daily stand-up, is that you got 100% attendance. If you're not attending, that means there's no conflict. The guy is on PTO or he's sick. Those are the only other conflicts. So you ideally have 100% participation in the daily stand-up. And so you got a flag that's dragging over and it needs further attention. All the parties that need to address it are notified right there and then. And if a meet after needs to happen, that is scheduled. So that's how you deal with something like that. Anyone else?
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool beans. Well, I just wanted to, again, hold on, let me get this. So basically what I wanted to go, and you guys heard our Scrum Masters here, right? And I'm glad we got so many people that know about this subject here. And so this makes it so much easier to talk about what is expected, right? This collaboration between team members in an Agile team. The team members in the Agile team have this.
All right, while we're waiting on Humphrey to start, right, I also want to follow up on the last slide that we had, a couple conversation about blockers and impediment, because it's important for us to actually understand what those differences are, right? So my first question that I wanted to ask to you guys, and I want us to actually have a conversation about this, and also when we're having this conversation, be elaborative. If you can give examples and help us visualize how that would look like, right? How do you differentiate between a blocker and an impediment? What are the differences? Who wants to go?
And maybe we can also hear from non-practicing Scrum Masters. Just give us an idea of what you think.
Opposite.
Okay, so it sounds an impediment, you said an impediment slows and a blocker blocks it. Okay, who wants to give more example and also elaborate?
Well, I would like to say,
Yeah, so like the blocker is probably when you guys have a licensing issue where your developers can no longer work on a particular software because probably the license expired, or they cannot deploy some particular codes to some environments because of some things. That's a blocker, because it would definitely stop you guys from working. You would not be able to go ahead with the work. But an impediment is maybe you guys have bugs, or you have I would say, yeah, bug is a very good example of impediments. It would obviously slow down your work, but it's not going to stop you guys from deploying that feature.
Okay, awesome. Barbara, you wanted to say something? Thank you, Saya.
yeah, I guess it's already said.
Oh, okay, no problem. Thank you, thank you. We'll catch you next time. All right, any other perspective on that? Blockers and impediments. Any additional feedback, especially with working Scrum Master?
Well, I'll quickly add, right? Especially when, and I've heard this before in this meeting, that there's always this when they say bug, it could also mean impediment. If they say blocker, it could also mean impediment. And I always disagree, right? Impediment is it's an official log, right? And Jira does this well, where you log the impediment, and then you will only log the impediment if a story cannot progress. Like it's stopped. You can't do anything because of this impediment, and it can be broad. It can be broad in the sense that it could be like an environmental issue. You can have a login issue. Basically, you threw water on your computer and now it can't work. Stuff like that. That you can log that as an impediment, right? So that impeded the progress, basically, of that story or enabler, what have you, right? Now, if, for instance, you have a bug, we no longer have an impediment, we have a bug that the story still stops, but now we have a bug, and then we work the bug, work out the bug. The bug has a root cause. The bug has a root cause, so you would know what that is, and that's logged. And a bug can also be shifted to done. You don't work an impediment. We remove impediments. We could remove impediment by now creating a bug to address the defect of whatever, right? So and so that's when it makes sense. When they say what a Scrum Master does as far as removing impediments, and removing impediments is that when one is recognized, when you recognize its resolution, now it's removed, right? That's what removing from as far as a Scrum Master goes. You can't remove a bug, you have to solve the bug. You can't remove a blocker because what an impediment does is block, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm gonna save that for now because there's something that you said. If I wanted to follow up on that, we're gonna be here for too long, so I'm gonna leave that. The next question was, what happens when a blocker or an impediment proceed after 2 days or after a couple of days? Or as a Scrum Master, do you typically have a time frame that you give a blocker or an impediment before you say, okay, come on, guys, what's going on? We need to figure out what to do. So any feedback on that? Olawumi, I see your hand up.
So I wasn't going to answer your question. I just wanted to give Humphrey a hard time, but it's really not a hard time. It's just something.
No more hard time, because I just said We
Okay,
can't follow up
Humphrey.
with that. If we
Okay.
follow up with that, we're gonna be here forever.
Sorry, so Humphrey, you said the role of a Scrum Master is to remove every impediment, right? Impediment is a sick team member. How am I gonna fix a sick team member? How am I gonna do that?
How can you fix a sick team member?
Yes, sir.
So basically you log the impediment. Now the story can't progress, right?
Mhm.
And basically how whatever your spread is, you have to now defer the story, right? And so now that impediment is removed, it can no longer block the story. And once because you've already recognized what has impeded the progress. So basically the impediment is just a log. Basically, it is a statement why the story hasn't moved,
And
right? Once it's no longer relevant, and and like you said, what if the person is sick? You can't remove the person being sick. Yeah, well, my expectation is number one that the person will get better. They will get back to it, but that's removed even before then, right? At least that's what I would do, because I've recognized that the progress of the story couldn't go. I would defer it. I know it's rolling, or I know it's going to a future date. That's it. They asked me why, because this impediment was logged at so and so date, right? That's what happened. So that in a sense, that's what it means to remove, because you don't work an impediment. You can't work it like a log, and you can't call it a blocker because you can't log a blocker. You can't go back and say it's a blocker. Blocker is it's almost slang for something that's blocking you. But should I go ahead when I have on a DSU, if someone says, well, I have a blocker, and they explain what that blocker is, I said, okay, should I go ahead and log an impediment? They will let me know whether I have to log it or not. Like, make an official statement that this story can't go further because of so-and-so blocker. And they will say, well, no, hold on. I'm going to talk to dude, and perhaps we can get some insight on this, and then I find a workaround and we can proceed. We don't have a blocker anymore. We don't have any impediment, what have you, and it just depends on how it takes some technical know-how to really know, like, it's sometimes not all the time, when to log an impediment or not. And your feedback as far as what your team members give you.
I have, so I think just to get a better clarity on this, right? Impediments can end up being a blocker. And it now depends on how you actually identify that during your DSU. For example, there was a time our customers' API was down, so we couldn't get data from their API, right? In that regard, the team was having an impediment because why? They couldn't actually get those data. But after a couple of days, realized that, okay, since this API is down, we can't proceed to working on this item. Then that impediment of not getting data end up being a blocker. Now we blocked that item and actually said, okay, we're blocked on this because of this happened, right? So it now depends on how your team identify what exactly is a blocker or what exactly is an impediment. But with my own probably understanding in some these scenarios, I can say impediments end up becoming blockers. Depends on what scenario you're trying to apply those terminologies on. So that would be probably my 2 cents on this conversation.
That's fair. You can identify stories that block other stories, right? So this story is blocked by this. You won't be logging an impediment. This story can't go on because it's been blocked. And again, this is a similar situation that I'm dealing with. I just described the situation where, okay, that was just poor planning from a team that I had taken over. That one team was working on, again, 2 stories that blocks a story that we're working on in the same sprint. They didn't end up finishing theirs on time, so it stopped us from completing our story. All right. So question, do I log an impediment? No, because it's identified, we had to identify it already that these stories block this. And upon a completion of one story, that's when the other story will proceed. And that's that. That's why I won't log an impediment. Impediment is, to me, for the most part, it's those unforeseen things that happen as far as, stopping the progress, but not necessarily a story that's already been identified. It didn't just happen that a story did not, it just all of a sudden blocked it. We knew you had to have known that beforehand. And sometimes the planning was off. Like in this case, the planning was off to have these things happen at the same sprint. One should have proceeded, but it is what it is. And that's
what's in a situation whereby you're looking for a sign off on something? For example, something happened a couple of weeks ago. The director of engineering was away in India. One of my QA had an item that they needed a sign off on that. Okay. And in such scenario, will you call it an impediment or will you call it a blocker then? Because this is not this is not a story thing now.
Right. It's an impediment.
It's an impediment. Okay, I guess probably like Victoria said, if we start this conversation with my...
So let's park that.
Right? You guys started it.
Is it safe to say?
That's why I said let's park it,
Guys,
right? That will be a tango for another day. So does I think Brian, you had your hands up.
Sorry, Victoria. Sorry, you asked a question about how long.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to go back to that, but let's wrap up with what we were just talking about. Brian, you haven't you had your hands up. Do you have something to say, or shall we move on?
Yeah, we should move on.
All right. So and then so that's still an old hand, right? Let me just make sure. Prior to that, I asked a question, right? As a Scrum Master, especially at working Scrum Master, do you guys have a time frame or a time box? Do you give a blocker to be sitting, right? How do you begin to say, okay, this blocker has been sitting here, or an impediment, right, has been sitting here? Do you say, okay, after 2 days, come on, we need to figure out how to go about fixing this? Or do you have a specific time frame you give your team, or you have used effectively to say, okay, what's going on? Why do we still have this blocking? What can we do or escalate? Any takers?
So for me, honestly, it depends on, okay, so let's say we're in the daily stand-up, right? And so a developer, he brings up an impediment and he says, this is an issue that I'm having, but this is a solution that I'm coming up with. I'm talking to this person. And so by tomorrow, I will probably have an update, right? So now it's the next day. And he's saying, okay, yeah, I talked to this person and they said this and this, and then tomorrow I'll have an update. So depending on the solution, I would know if I need to escalate it or not. If you keep telling me tomorrow, maybe after 3 days, I'll be like, okay, so let's actually have a meeting. Who do I need to involve in this? Let's have a conversation, right? So it just depends on the kind of issue that it is.
Okay. So it's important to know what is the issue, and also not just know the issue, but the feedback you're getting from the developer before you determine what step to take next.
Exactly.
All right, any other perspective?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so as a Scrum Master, you have a team, right, that you lead in, and one of your developers have a story that has a dependency that's running into 2 different sprints, like the other service won't be ready until in a month time if you guys running in 2 week sprint, right? And you had to keep moving that story from that developer to the next sprint, to the next sprint. And you say, you know what, we want you to do something else. Here's another story that we want you to work on. But that story needs to be broken into 4 parts. So, and you give that one developer to do that whole story in the middle of the sprint. As a Scrum Master, how would you handle that if that developer can finish that during that sprint? What would be best practice for that Scrum Master to do with those type of issues when they arise?
All right, do we have any takers on that?
I understood your question. So I want to say I just had that scenario happen. And if I'm wrong, sorry, pardon me, but what we would do, or what we did on my end, was to go back and reevaluate the stories during refinement and check on the importance and make sure you look at the priority, is a P1, P2, whatnot, how important it is, what is the ask, what is the scope, and when is it due, for deliverable. And once we identify that, if it's not something that we feel it's not a do or die or whatnot, we'll put it back in backlog. And if it's the question of the bigger story that you break down, what we did was create one big epic and have multiple stories under it for for several engineers that have the same experiences, whatnot, to work on those stories together within that sprint and ensure that they finish it. So that's the way I've handled it in my company or my team. So basically reprioritizing, asking the right question, probing, going back to drawing tables, looking at the scope, looking at the time frame, what all does it entail? And if it's something that we need, we go for it, make sure it's worked. If it's not, and of course you look at the capacity, you look at who has the best knowledge or skill set that is able to do that in best time frame. So I hope I answered that question, because I was really trying to frame it in my head. So.
And another thing I would like to add to that, right? I've come to realization that sometimes, so I've had a situation whereby a developer can actually finish a story in probably 2 days, right? But they always act like, so because, okay, I worked as a database administrator and an engineer prior to becoming a Scrum Master. So there are some items that we know is probably just code changes, just quick changes, quick fix. But I've been in a team whereby this developer will work on this item for a whole sprint. But what am I going to do? I'm not the manager, right? In such situation, I would advise you have a team member that is skilled and understands those stories and is willing to discuss with you as a Scrum Master about that person's item. Then you can know how much work that will take. So in situation whereby the story has been moved over after a couple of sprints, I will definitely advise you as a Scrum Master to talk to that developer. Let them know, after you documenting whatever the other developer told you about that story, have a one-on-one with them and ask them what their concerns are, and tell them to sync up with probably a senior developer in your team so they can get that clarification, right? But if that doesn't stop the problem, then you can definitely have to escalate it in the sense of you try to reassign that item to them from them and assign something else to them and see if they're going to repeat such manner of actually extending those items. Then that can actually call for questions and concerns for you to see how the manager could come into the question of talking to that developer. So that's just my 2 cents on that item.
if that helps too.
You actually went into if we had time, right? The question I wanted to even ask is, as a Scrum Master, how do you know when your developers are BSing you, right? Because you will see that oftentimes. One story, they're working with that story the whole sprint, and even at the end of the sprint, they still don't deliver it, right? And it's like that rollover pattern. How do you, even especially knowing that you may not have that technical know-how, right, or the technical knowledge, but how do you understand when a developer is really not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Or they're BSing you? How do you understand, or when do you know, and then what do you do to counter that? So you kind of dive in.
I can speak to that. First off, now you have to first off, as a Scrum Master, right, and you'll probably be knocked over technical stuff, right? And it's important to basically set your mind now, especially when you get into it, right? Again, it's interaction above processes and tools, right? Do not be confused. Don't let the lingo, Kubernetes, Django, and all that. No, those are tools, right? Those are just tools. Tell me what you're doing. What is supposed to come out of it? What do I expect, right? That's basically what you can talk in those terms. Okay, so how long does it take for you to do that? Okay, so then if I gave you a day, what can I look at? What can I get? And this is again another situation that I dealt with. Like I had a developer. Even when we had tasks, these tasks used to take 3 days, and like, what are we doing? I mean, you can't be telling me like this one task it takes 3 days. Right. And I made an objective. So number one, I did go and do my background research, right? I did go watch some YouTube videos, look at some stuff, and kind of get an idea, right? To, give me some ammunition into, and it also helped me ask the questions. And so, and you will always be able to stab at it, right? And again, this might not happen right away, right? This is not like something that happens overnight. The guy is going to drag you for a minute, but you take tabs, right? You're going to get him. You're going to find a way to talk about this assignment or how he's going about it, and he can be an honesty. It might not be at face value. He's trying to deceive you. He probably not, but he just understands it this way, that it happens this way. And so you're going to try and help him now talk about it in real terms, not the tool and all this stuff. You're going to tell him like basically in real terms, okay, you're doing this to acquire what? How does this work? How does it affect this? If it does, when can I expect that? Those are, you gotta have that kind of engagement, and it takes time, right? And it takes, you and the person you're talking to have a cordial understanding about, you guys are just trying to help each other out. So that's the way I have dealt with it, and I must say I've been pretty successful.
Okay. All right, thank you. We are literally way over time.
Yeah, no kidding.
Do you want to wrap up?
Sure. Like we were going to talk about definition done, but you know how that.
Sorry. Thank you.
All right. So with that being said, awesome. All right, thank you guys for joining. I hope today's session was impactful and you guys learned a lot. from this session today. Once again, today's session was all about how to effectively facilitate a daily stand-up. Thank you all for joining. Next week, we do have another session, so please join. We also have a sign-up sheet, so please go ahead and sign up if you do want to facilitate. And of course, you would have our support, my support in facilitation if need be. Thank you all for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. I'll see you guys next week, Wednesday. Thank you all. Bye.